Debbie McCoy's condo complex has crumbling foundations. She's been pushing for testing for years and says this is a necessity.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie McCoy, Connecticut Concrete Queen, lead advocate in the state of Connecticut, as well as an international advocate going into my 10th year. To recap part 1, I explained how by happenstance I learned from my brother-in-law, who had just come back from a 2016 FDC conference in Dublin, Connecticut. He told me that his tour guide, Patrick Fahey, who once worked in concrete industry, had told him about crumbling concrete in homes in Dublin area. That piqued my interest as my mother is from Ireland, and I had just learned about the Quebec, Canada experience from an October 2016 conference in Connecticut, where my grandmother is from, and my children having homes with crumbling concrete. Ireland, Canada, and the USA almost simultaneously. Ireland's first known case was 1997. USA's first known case, 1993 for Mass and 1995 for Connecticut. And Canada's 2 quarries opening in 1995 and 96 with their first known case in 2001, only a few years after they built them. The host rock has a lot to do with speed in which the concrete will deteriorate. Canada's Gabriel, 3 to 4 years, Connecticut's Brimfield schist, and Ireland's mudstone with an abundance of framboidal pyrite, as well as the phyllite with an abundance of reactive peritite. Connecticut became aware of the slow-moving disaster in 2015, just a few years after Canada. And in Ireland, they had formed a pyrite action group in Dublin area in late 2011, once Homebound began to deny claims. And in late 2013, folks in County Mayo and County Donegal formed a coalition due to tainted aggregate in all 3 countries, costing billions and billions of dollars to mitigate. Unfortunately, the industry folks thought would cover the cost to remediate declined to mitigate the damages. The industry that built the homes declined payment as it was not caused by their workmanship. And finally, the industry that improperly sourced for aggregate declined to mitigate the damages because the cost to mitigate exceeded any one company's assets. So the insurance industry folks that we thought would cover the cost to mitigate said no. And the construction industry said no. And the concrete industry just didn't have the funds to cover the billions and billions of dollars in costs. The government has to step up when there is no legal recourse. There is no safety net with insurance, and the industry that caused the harm either didn't know they were improperly sourcing because they negated to test prior to sourcing and selling their aggregate for hardcore fill, or for aggregate to be used in concrete products such as bridges, dams, septic tanks, foundations, and concrete blocks. Or they knew of such reactive iron sulfide minerals, but thought, never here. When we left off, I had explained in 2001, Ireland allowed self-regulation. Now, in part 1, I did say in the beginning, the quarries were self-regulated in 2001, and I did make a mistake by later on saying when the quarry self-regulated at 2011, so I just want to clear that up. But Ireland self-regulated in 2001. There was no hard or soft powers. It was the extraction and manufacturing companies' responsibility for keeping impurities out of their product going on the market. Building regulations didn't require testing of hardcore fill for use in residential buildings during the Celtic Tiger building boom, ranging from 1997 through 2007. In that decade, a lot of damage was done from a fraction of the quarries open during that time. The pyrite panel mentioned 5 quarries where the tainted aggregate may have been sourced of the mudstone aggregate with abundant reactive framboidal pyrite. Many of the researchers found damages to the home with less than 1% framboidal pyrite. I believe one researcher stated that they seen damages at 0.6%, and another said it's as bad as peritite, which is 0.1% total sulfur. Pyrite has a limit of 1%, and peritite has a limit of 0.1%. And in Canada, they found homes affected with less than 0.23, which was the arbitrary limit the judge put on the aggregate, who sided with the affected homeowners and portioned out the penalties that cost the contractors, engineer geologists, and quarry producers. 1 year after Ireland allowed self-regulation, the European Union's Technical Committee published two very important aggregate standards to be implemented by each member state. EN 12342, 2002, aggregate for hardcore, unbound and hydraulically bound materials used in civil engineering and road construction. NSAI published guidance SR 21, 2004 for use with aggregates in the harmonized standard. The testing method used EN 1744-1, 1998, total sulfur assessment. EN 12620, 2002, aggregate for use in concrete. NSAI published guidance, standard recommendation, SR 16, 2004, for use with aggregates in the harmonized standard. The testing method used was EN 1744-1, 1998, total sulfur. Clause 6.3.2 specifically states that if peritite is present, the limit is 0.1%, as it's an unstable iron sulfide mineral. EN 1744-1, 1998, total sulfur is the only chemical property where the standard mandates a limit value that shall not be exceeded. The allowable total sulfur limit is significantly decreased from 1% to 0.1% where peritite is present. Although it doesn't detail a method of assessment for identifying if an aggregate contains peritite, it uses total sulfur as the proxy to estimate the prevalence of sulfide mineralization within the aggregate product. Acid digestive test method, which is EN 1744-1, 1998, clause 11. Aggregate is treated with brine and nitric acid to convert any sulfur compounds present into sulfate. EN 1744-1, 2009, clause 11.1. Aggregate tested with hydrogen peroxide and hydrochloric acid to convert any sulfur compounds present into sulfate. Clause 11.2, high temperature combustion aggregate is ignited at high temperature in an atmosphere of pure oxygen to convert any sulfur compounds present to sulfur dioxide, which is quantified by infrared detectors. In June 2024, NASA, which is the National Standards Authority Ireland, drafted a position paper from Technical Committee 153 Aggregate Panel, which stated the majority of labs in Ireland currently use the acid digestion test method EN 17:2009 to test for total sulfur. However, through researching literature and round-robin testing performed by GSI, found it poses a risk to the market. The research was consistent with studies done by Zerko et al. And Kurt Astley, Norway, presented at the International Conference in Ireland in 2002, and Obart presented at the International Conference in Canada in 2024. The acid digestive test method consistently underestimates the total sulfur by 23 to 85%. Out of the three testing methods, Clause 11, Clause 11.1, and Clause 11.2, the research GSI has conducted sample sets 11 different materials assembled for round-robin testing and sent to 10 labs for each method and recommends the high-temperature combustion test method should be used in place of acid digestion test method for advanced precision of test results and to minimize the possibility of the inaccurate test results being returned. The AD method is not fit for purpose. There is a risk that unsuitable aggregate, specifically aggregate with peritite, which is subject to a 0.1 total sulfur limit, may be inadvertently assessed as suitable for use in concrete. This crisis in Ireland, covering 16 counties, was due to aggregate. And the aggregate, even though quarry producers in 2001 were allowed to self-regulate, they weren't allowed to cause harm. So the EU created harmonized European norms, standards, for aggregate used for hardcore and aggregate used for concrete. And, but in both of those standards, the standard testing method, EN 1744-1, was the acid digestion. And that was concerning because it underestimates the total sulfur, and where peritite is present, if it's already underestimating, and peritite is 0.1%, it's 0.1%, then they have major concerns about that. In 2007, when the Ireland government and industry stakeholders were informed of the test results coming back that framboidal pyrite was the cause for unusual cracking, both the industry and government pushed for a swift review of standard recommendation for for the standard recommendation 21, for IS 12342-2002, SR 21A 2007 was amended at that point. October 2007 till December 2007, the industry folks and the aggregate committee got together and they amended SR 21-2004, and it's now called Standard Recommendation SR 21:2007. Also, at the same time, they amended the building regulations. Technical Guidance C was amended to refer to SR 21:2004 plus A1 2007, which provided more detail on hardcore. As mentioned in the first episode, in 2001, self-regulation, 2002, harmonized standards, 2003, the quarry that caused thousands of affected homes in Dublin, Fingal area, folks had no idea the builders who were specifying aggregate to Clause 804, aggregate free of deleterious materials, that the quarry producers were trying to keep up with demand for construction aggregates, and all it took was a few quarries to skip testing the host rock being sourced for uses in constructing homes, schools, hospitals, and youth facilities. They each had abundant peritite. From 2003 to 2005, unusual cracking appeared. Engineers were chasing the cracks, and Homebound and other industry folks were investigating the cause for these unusual cracks. They brought in Dr. Michael Mayer from Goldair Associates. He had come in 2005. He was originally from Dublin area, and then he moved at 27 years old to Canada, where he joined Goldair Associates. And then in 2005, he moved back to Ireland for a time being to set up a Gold Air Association Dublin office. He contacted his colleague, Fred Schremer, who's a photographer and geologist, who confirmed in 2007 that the cracks were due to reactive pyrite causing the floors to heave. Ireland, as I mentioned, acted swiftly to stop the sources and learn from the incredibly expensive pyrite heave crisis. They learned, they acted swiftly, but they still allowed self-regularization. From 2007 through 2011, Homebound, the warranty company for new houses, paid for the mitigation due to the structural issues. Also during this time, lawsuits were being brought by contracting companies against the quarry producers. The most talked about case is JEC, James Elliott Construction Company versus Irish Asphalt, because in May 2011, the judge found for the contractor not being the culpable party, rather it was the source of the aggregate and the quarry producers sourcing the aggregate. August 31st, 2011, and that was just shortly after the decision. So only 4 months later, Homebound met with Department of Housing Minister and informed him that they will no longer be covering the cost to mitigate the damages, that it wasn't a mechanical issue, rather it was a chemical issue caused by the aggregate being supplied. They also sent a letter circulated to all their clients that they would no longer be covering the costs to remediate, no longer mitigating the damages. September 2011, within 3 weeks of the Department of Housing Minister being told that Homebound was no longer covering the costs of repairs, and now 1,100 homes had already been repaired from 2005 through 2011. 1,100 homes were being repaired and 850 were in progress of being repaired. So they covered a lot of the repairs. So by September 2011, 3 weeks later, the Department of Housing established a pyrite panel to investigate the magnitude and economic impact the disaster would cause and technical recommendations. Now, they already knew the cause. They knew it because come 2005, and this is all the people that worked on it, this pile here. Come 2005, up till 2011, a lot of investigation and research and testing was being done. So the minister set it up, an expert panel, to look at what's the economic impact, and he also stated no cost to the homeowners. He wanted a remediation scheme set up, but he didn't want the homeowners to have to pay for it. September 2011 to June 2012, the Pyrite panel held meetings with 44 individuals, organizations, and offered 24 recommendations. They even commended the organizers of the April Pyrite Symposium, Dr. Brian Hawkins and Dr. Thomas St. John, which was held at Trinity College with over 300 attendees. Dr. Robbie Goodall, Paul Ford, James Lombard, Dr. Michael Mayer, and Mike Eaton, all contributing to the research on the ground in Ireland, so that by the time June 2012 came to pass, those on the Pyrite panel and the industry understood the cause of unusual cracking was due to reactive framboidal pyrite. It was at that symposium that Dr. Brian Hawkins delivered a presentation and spoke about pyrite and peritite being discovered in their research in the Dublin area. 24 locations in Ireland is what Dr. Hawkins wrote in his book. And now all the people that I mentioned previously, like Paul Ford, James Lombard, Mike Eaton, Dr. Michael Mayer, Dr. Thomas St. John, and Dr. Brian Hawkins, they are all in that book from Dr. Hawkins, the book here to the left that Dr. Hawkins wrote. December 2012, the DOH minister established an informal Pyrite Resolution Board. The remit was to implement the recommendations into a pyrite scheme and create a standard for which the scheme will be informed. So they, immediately put together a pyrite resolution board. And the folks that were on that were Paul Ford, Sean Balfe, John O'Connor, Matt Gallagher, Caroline Gill, and the IS 398 that was the IS 398 2013 that was created was a procedure to assess, test, and categorize houses affected, what the eligibility requirements are, the terms and conditions would be, and to create a framework panel of engineers and contractors for the housing agency to tender. In the beginning, the pyrite panel found there was a lack of clarity in relation to information on pyrite and its impact, and in the absence of this information, many theories abounded. I mention this because just 1 year after the pyrite panel delivered the report to the Department of Housing Minister Phil Hogan, County Donegal would learn their homes were affected by mica. It wasn't a tested and scientifically proven theory. It was based on a mechanical causation rather than a chemical causation, which would cost the affected homeowners in County Donegal 12 years of time. Now, I mentioned that because in the beginning, the pyrite panel found there was a lack of clarity in relation to information on pyrite and its impact, and in the absence of that information, many theories abounded, just as many theories abounded about what was happening to homes in County Donegal in 2013. The homes started to show cracking, and it was in the winter of 2010 to 2011 when the crackings began. And in the pyrite panel, they talk about the Celtic tiger and the building boom. In the year 2006, they had 93,000 units built. So it was a lot. There was a lot of building going on at that time. The informal pyrite resolution board that I mentioned consisted of John O'Connor, Paul Ford, Sean Balfe, Matt Gallagher, and Caroline Gill. John O'Connor, a chartered engineer, Paul Ford, also a chartered engineer. You will hear John O'Connor and John Wickham mentioned quite often. They are the two most used and overworked men in the past 15 years, next to, of course, Mr. Paul Ford. Now, I mentioned John O'Connor and John Wickham because this right here shows Housing Agency, Department of Housing, Pyrite Panel, Pyrite Resolution Board, IS 398, IS 398-2, IS 465, IS 465 Review. And you'll see John O'Connor, John Wickham, Paul Ford. I mean, they check all the blocks. When Mr. Ford first spoke at the June 23rd, 2022 DAL meeting, I thought, geez, he sure did come in with a lot of swagger. But after, hearing his name mentioned and seeing how he spoke with, a vibrato, he, came across as, this is what I have to say. I know what I'm saying, and I'm an expert. And yeah, he is. He is an expert at what he's done, and he's been called upon quite often by the government. He was on the Pyrite Resolution Board. He was the chair of IS 398. He was asked to write the report in 2021 that the Attorney General mentions In his letter, September 7, 2021, he was appointed to the expert working group as the chair in January 2022. And he was doing that work for Department of Housing in January, February, March, April. And John Wickham, he's with the Department of Housing, a technical advisor for the building standards. He's been in everything. He's been on every committee. He's helped with the PRB. He's helped quite often, the IS 465. He's been involved in everything. But I think the gentleman that holds the most hats is John O'Connor, because John O'Connor was on the informal Pyrite Resolution Board. Then he was on the formal Pyrite Resolution Board that was formed in 2000. The first one was 2012, the second one was 2013. Then he was the chairman on the Pyrite Resolution Board 2014, 15, 16. He was in the working group in 2021, June, July, August, September. And then he was appointed to the expert working group and back on the Pyrite Resolution Board. He was the CEO of the housing agency, and he was also appointed the homeowner liaison in February 2022. So he has the most hats and is the most worked man in the government. So to get back to this. In December 2013, the Pyrite Resolution Act was enacted and made for a pyrite remediation scheme and a formal Pyrite Resolution Board working in tangent with the housing agency, which was established in 2012. In December 2013, a large meeting in County Donegal held with the engineer who was seeing a lot of homes destroyed, but what he summarized the cause to being that was causing the pattern and web-like cracking in the concrete blocks making up the house as being mica. It would from then on be known as the mica crisis, and a coalition formed using mica in its name, the Mica Action Group, or MAG as commonly known. January 2014, the PRB and Housing Agency commenced the Pyrite remediation scheme with online applications and a dedicated email address for homeowners to learn every step and stage they were on in order to keep the homeowner informed at all times. Only 5 homes were repaired at that time as part of a pilot program. The Pyrite panel in 2012 estimated the cost to mitigate per dwelling would be €45,000. By 2025, the average cost is €9,500 per dwelling. And I know this because this is everything to do with the pyrite heap. And in this stack is the part of the remit for the Pyrite Resolution Board was that annually they would have to produce a report showing how many applications were received, how many homes were repaired. And so I have read every single one of them, and this sheet here is condensed to cover 10 years worth of applications. And as of 2025, they have 3,420 applications and 2,865 homes repaired. And that was January 2025. So they are closer to more like 3,000 homes repaired in 10 years. Now, since they started their pyrite in the first 5 years of the Pyrite Resolution remediation scheme, in 5 years they had completed 2,000 homes. In the defective concrete block scheme, in 5 years since they passed that scheme in 2020, they have 220 homes completed. 2,000 homes, 220. It would take from 2013, when the government came aware of the DCB crisis, the defective concrete block crisis, until 2016 to form an expert panel, in 2017 to receive the report, in 2018 to get an Irish standard similar in context to the IS 398 2013 standard, in which it refers to a protocol for testing, assessing, and categorizing the cause and remedial options. For IS 398 2013 Part 1 and Part 2, the only option was remove and replace, because the cause was scientifically proven, and it was proven that it was framboidal pyrite, and the only fail-safe remediation is to remove and replace. However, with IS 465, there were 5 remedial options. It took 7 years to get a grant scheme for the DCB people, and it took 3 years to get the pyrite remediation scheme. In 2020, the average cost to remediate a dwelling in the pyrite remediation scheme was said to be €67,000, according to the DOH report. It was hoped that remove and replace, which requires option 1, a full demolition for the defective concrete block grant, would be the exception, and that the option 4 would be more the rule, with the 90% government coverage coming in at €67,500. Still of the belief that the issue was a mechanical issue, as the remediation option for County Mayo, affected by reactive pyrite, would be option 1, full demolition. So they thought in County Mayo, they knew, because homes were tested, that they knew that it was the reactive pyrite. And so accordingly, they said, oh, those homes, and there were a few, about 300, would need to be demolished, remove the whole defective concrete blocks and replace them. So it's a complete rebuild. But in County Donegal, where they assumed there'd be 6,000 homes, they went with the hunch, the theory, that it was mica, that it was a mechanical issue, that it was just affecting the outer layer of the blocks, because they were saying that it was mica. Mica absorbs water, holds on to it, and then if freeze thaw was creating the cracks. But some people had already fixed the outer blocks, and lo and behold, the cracks were coming back again. And that's because they had the wrong cause. And they would later find out that it was actually peritite. And peritite is far more unstable than pyrite. It oxidizes 100 times faster and deteriorates at a speed that is just unknown to folks in Ireland. At a May conference, one of the engineers stated, "We didn't know much about peritite in 2018 when we created Irish Standard 465. And that was testing and assessing and categorizing the homes based on mica being a mechanical issue. So they figured, oh, we can go with option 4 or option 5. Option 5 was 55,000. You just take off the layers, you spit on it a little, put a Band-Aid there, and that's it. Option 4, spit on it a little more, 2 more Band-Aids, that's it. But really, they needed option 1, because County Donegal has the worst affected homes in the world. And that's because the host rock, the phyllite, had an abundance of peritite, way over the 0.1% limit. So I'm going to speak to you now about what are the similarities between the pyrite heave affected homeowners and the defective concrete blocks homeowners. So the similarities: pyrite heave, aggregate is the cause. Defective concrete blocks, aggregate is the cause. Pyrite heave, HEN 13242, 2002. Defective concrete blocks HEN 12620, 2002. No fault of their own for the pyrite heave. Defective concrete blocks, no fault of their own. Pyrite heave, scheme of last resort. Defective concrete blocks, scheme of last resort. Government set up a pyrite panel. Government set up an expert panel for the defective concrete blocks. The Irish Standard Protocol for testing, assessing, and categorizing was IS 398, 1 and 2. Now for the DCB, IS Standard Protocol IS 465, 2018. For the IS 398, it had a systematic review in 2016. And the review was completed within 1 year, and they had a new IS 398, 2017. The Irish Standard Protocol IS 465, 2018, the review started in 2002, and the review only just now went for consultation, and the consultation period ended in July. So it took 3 years for them to review IS 465. And why did it take 3 years? Because they had to do research. Everybody was begging the government to do research. Petrolabs was asking them to do it. The expert panel asked for more research. Even the folks that wrote from Cassidy's quarry that submitted a letter even said more research needed to be done. So anyways, also for the pyrite heave, the similarity is prioritize the works through a DCR, which is a damage condition report. And the DCR had to have a 2. If it had a 1, you weren't eligible to get on the scheme at that point. They would look at it and they would say, no, it's not a rating 2, it's a rating 1, so come back when it's a rating 2. We'll monitor the building, your dwelling, and then when it gets to that damage, you'll be entered onto the scheme. For the defective blocks, defective concrete block, they prioritize the work by a damage threshold. So and one other thing, if by chance they do have an exceptional circumstance, if your home is adjoining a home, say this home and this home are adjoining each other, and this one has a DCR 2 and this one has a DCR 1, they won't hold up the works. They will put that in priority. So DCR 1, if it's adjoined to a DCR 2, they will allow that to go ahead and get worked on. They're not going to make it wait. Now here are the difference between the pyrite remediation scheme and the defective concrete block grant. Right there tells you there's a difference. One is a remediation scheme. The second is a grant for financial assistance. Now, the pyrite panel came up with 24 recommendations. The defective concrete expert panel came up with 8 recommendations. The pyrite panel had 44 interviews with individuals and organizations. The defective concrete block grant expert panel had 21 interviews. The pyrite remediation scheme offers tax exemption for pyrite homes. If you can prove that you have a pyrite and you show your building condition assessment report and it proves that you have pyrite, you can get a tax exemption for a time period. In the defective concrete blocks, there are no tax exemption. There was, in the pyrite remediation scheme, testing, investigation, collaboration. In the defective concrete block expert panel, the remit was no testing. No testing. You couldn't do any testing. So how is that an investigation? Do you remember here in Connecticut, the first thing the governor did was he had Department of Consumer Protection and the Attorney General investigate it, and they hired the University of Connecticut to research the issue and go and test the quarry and test the foundations, where they found the quarry had 2.543% peritite and abundant. No upfront costs to pay contractors for the pyrite remediation scheme. Upfront costs to pay contractors for the defective concrete block grant. Now, that is a deterrent right there, because who's got the upfront costs to pay? Upfront costs, like we're talking $10,000 for the engineer, $30,000 to demolish the home, another $10,000 to haul it off. I mean, the upfront costs are outstanding. Value for money. No detriment, restored the market value. So when they were doing the pyrite remediation scheme, they had an audit. And the auditor said, there's no detriment because the market value has been restored. Now, on the defective concrete block, there is no value for money, and there is an adverse impact on the market value, because if you go with option 5 or 4 and not option 1, which is remove and replace, total rebuild, you're leaving behind blocks that still have the peritite in it. And so it does have an adverse impact on the market value. It's not restored. It's very shaky. Nobody will touch it unless it's a rebuild. Procedure. There's a hardship procedure and an urgency in the pyrite remediation scheme. There's no procedure for hardship and urgency. There's a project manager for the pyrite remediation scheme. There's no project manager for the defective concrete blocks. There's no sunset date on the pyrite remediation scheme, whereas there is a sunset date on the defective concrete block. No time limits for start and end repairs on the pyrite remediation scheme, whereas there is a time limit for start and end repairs. You have to do it within 18 months. And it takes a full year to get the home done, and there's a shortage of labor, and the costs are astronomical with the inflation and with COVID and building shortages, contract shortages. No costs for overruns. There is concern to the homeowners for cost overruns. The pyrite remediation scheme is run by a central entity. The defective concrete block scheme was run by county councils. Now, they're up to major amounts of, they first had County Mayo and County Donegal on the scheme. Then they added County Limerick, County Clare, and one other county. So then there were 3 more counties added. And now they want to add, I just read yesterday that during the second half of 2023, Fingal County Council, Sligo County Council, Wexford County Council, Carlow County Council formally requested that the housing agency assess dwellings in their respective administration areas for the purpose of becoming a designated local authority under the scheme, under the defective concrete block scheme. So even more counties want to come into that scheme. It's run by county council, and without one entity, you've got County Mayo running it, County Donegal running it, County Clare running it, County Limerick running it, and all the different counties are going to be running this scheme. And actually what they're doing is taking the applications, they're verifying the applications, and then the applications go to now the housing agency, who validates them by looking. They have what they call a consultant engineer hired by the government to assess the damage threshold for eligibility to be on the scheme. And also the housing agency lets you know what the option's going to be and what your total grant money is going to be. And the option that the original engineer gave these homeowners for the defective concrete block, many of them opted, 56% of them opted for, at 553, for option one, total demolition. But right now, the housing agency consulting engineers have downgraded 120 of those applications to cheaper repairs. Why? To save the government purse, not to save the home, not for the safety and health and welfare of the homeowner. No, it's to minimize the costs. Ancillary costs raised 3 times for the building condition assessment, storage, fees, and accommodation, 3 times under the pyrite remediation scheme. I believe they now get $2,000 a month for rent, whereas in the beginning, the defective concrete block scheme had no ancillary costs. It was added in to cover the storage and accommodations, but the accommodations is $15,000 for 12 months. I mean, you do the math. $1,000 a month, a little over $1,000 a month. Whereas the remediation scheme, they get $2,000 a month, and they can combine that $2,500 with the $8,500. That comes out to about $9,000 if they show a hardship where they can't find a home for less than $3,000 a month, because the limit is $9,000. No cap on the pyrite remediation scheme. There's no cap. Remember I mentioned that the pyrite panel said the average cost would be $45,000. Well, each year they saw the cost go to $57,000, to $60,000, $70,000, $85,000, and now it's €95,500 per dwelling. There's 2 caps. The first, defective concrete scheme that was passed in 2020 had a cap, and the second one had a cap. So they're working with caps, they're working with time limits, they're working with sunset dates. The capital work engineers and builders were hired to do the work. Now, on the defective concrete blocks, engineer consultants were hired for the housing agency to do the damage threshold. And the law was laid down very stringently that they had to abide by IS 465. That was what was informing them. And IS 465, they believed it was mica based on an unproven theory. And now you fast forward to 2025, when in fact the government knew in 2022, when we presented in November 2022, that it wasn't mica, it was peritite that was oxidizing, creating second mineral formation, and internal sulfide attack. So they had 2 caps. The capital works engineers and builders and the engineer consulting for homeowners were quite different. They had a homeowner agreement on the pyrite remediation scheme. That's all they had to do. They had to sign it. They had to say, yes, I am the dwelling owner, show proof of it, have their BCA report, and they handed it in. They got their DCR too. They were in line for an application, and every year they were repairing 200 to 400 dwellings a year. In 5 years, we've done 220 homes. Do the math. And for the defective concrete block, the Attorney General that weighed in on, before the regulations were created, when they passed the new enhanced scheme in 2022, prior to them passing it, in 2021, they had a working group that met they passed the first one June 2020, the first scheme. In 1 year's time, there was a march to Dublin because the homeowners were getting their lab results back that were saying, you have parotite, you have parotite, you have parotite. And the working group contacted me in August of 2021, and I explained what parotite was. Now, September 2021, the Attorney General sent a 6-page letter, and this is the Attorney General's 6-page letter. And you'll see I have 2 pages of writing on the 6th page, creating all the points of where it really seemed like he was bitter towards the homeowners, very bitter. It came off that way. So one of the statements was, make sure to lay down stringent conditions. The only condition for the pyrite remediation scheme was, give me your key and I'll give it back to you in 12 weeks. Here's money for storage. Here's money for rent. Here's money for your building condition assessment report. You don't have upfront costs. There's no financial barrier whatsoever on the pyrite remediation scheme. Whereas on the first scheme in 2020, there was a financial barrier. They had they had to come up with 10% because it was called a 90-10 scheme. So they had to come up with 10%, and they had to pay the engineering testing fees and the lab reports, which were anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000. So they automatically had a financial barrier. On the pyrite remediation scheme, there was no financial barrier. And at all times, the value for money was always front and center on their mind, and making sure every year they did a homeowner survey that it was to high satisfaction for the homeowners. They didn't care if the defective concrete block homeowners were satisfied with the financial barrier, with no project manager, with no help, with a sunset date, with a time limit. No care in the world. Now, on the pyrite remediation scheme, they had arrangements with Homebound to cover testing and the project management. €2 million is what Homebound put in, and they used it from 2014 till December 2024. They've now contacted another company that will be doing the sampling and testing. However, there was no charge to the homeowner. It was all done. So no arrangement with Homebound bond. There was testing was a barrier to entry. No cost to the homeowners, a true 100%. The panel wanted no cost to the homeowners. The housing minister wanted no cost for the homeowners. There was nobody that wanted costs, but there is a cost to the homeowners. In the first scheme, it was 10%. In the second scheme, they have upfront costs that they have to pay, and they have a cap. And what homeowners are finding is they have to come up with $40,000 to $100,000. Many of these homes are pensioners on a very limited financial means. In 5 years, I mentioned over 2,000 home repairs. In 5 years, only 220 homes. The pyrite remediation scheme was set up not to impede, but rather to repair as many homes as it can. And in 10 years to date, has repaired over 3,000 dwellings. And the houses are mortgageable, sellable, and insurable with that certificate. The defective concrete block scheme is perceived to encompass boundaries through terms of reference, remit, outside the parameters, outside the scope, each impounding on the other. No testing, no cause. They were to build on old regulations pre-2008, again, to save money, all of it to save money. The intent was for option 4, less costs, leaving the elderly, vulnerable, and pensioners to come up with upfront costs and project manage the demolition of repairs or to appeal a downgrade from the government-appointed engineers working not for the homeowner, but rather for the government. Now, I'm going to Ireland in just 3 weeks from today, and I will be meeting with the homeowners, and what I've discussed in 1 hour, I will be explaining in much more detail to the homeowners because, like I said, this and this is the defective concrete block scheme. This is the pyrite remediation scheme. This is the history of the defective concrete blocks. There's a lot of history because they're twisting themselves into a puzzle. And this all is the Attorney General. This is the two aggregates. Everything about IS 12620 and IS 12342. This is everything to do about the folks I mentioned. These are all the folks that were involved. I will be covering the folks that have been involved, recycled folks. I mean, and like I mentioned, John O'Connor, John Wickham, Paul Ford, they are very, very overworked and overused. And the pyrite remediation people should be thanking them because they worked very, very hard to help those homeowners. I only wish they worked half as hard to help our homeowners. So I've given you a lot of information, and I'm hoping that you tune in for part 3. I'll be going to Ireland. I'm going to take photos of homes, speak to some of the politicians, and hopefully film some of the homes so that you can see firsthand what these people in Ireland are dealing with pyrite and peritite. Ireland has an iron sulfide mineral crisis, and it's covering more than half of its country. So thank you for tuning in today, and I'll see you next time.